Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Room to Infinity series, brought to you by Enterprise Asia Center for Entrepreneurship, a joint collaborative platform between Enterprise Asia and also Help University, with today's topic on the future of entrepreneurship post-COVID-19. I'm Elizabeth from Enterprise Asia. Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to be the host for today's live session. We have a very special speaker for this particular session, Melvin Poh, founder of the Asian Entrepreneur, which I will be introducing later on as he shares insights and also his experiences about entrepreneurship during this crucial period. So now, to those who have already logged on, I would like to request that you help us. We do have a pop quiz for you. So in order for us to know you better, so please let us know from which country are you watching this from. Okay, as you're watching this from the FB live stream, so help us to pop in your answers to the comment section, just we can know you a little bit better. Which country are you from? So let's take a moment to do that.
Hi, William.
Great, we have audience from Hong Kong. Wow.
A very diverse bunch, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have audiences from various countries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is great. All right. So we would very much like to ask all of you to share the webinar to your friends, and feel free to even host a watch party. And do also help us to like our Enterprise Asia Facebook page. So click like now to receive updates on our future events. So in the meantime, do continue to key in your answers as Melvin will be able to read your live comments. So awesome. Our topic today is the future of entrepreneurship post-COVID-19. So before we begin, let me do a quick rundown. First, I'd like to introduce to you what Room to Infinity and its other affiliates is all about. And this will be followed by an introduction of today's speaker, Melvin, which after Melvin will begin his presentation. Finally, at the end of his presentation, there will be Q&A session. So this session will be recorded, so you will find the video at the Enterprise Asia Facebook page. So once again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Room to Infinity is brought to you by Enterprise Asia Center for Entrepreneurship, which is a joint collaborative platform between Enterprise Asia and Help University. Enterprise Asia is a regional non-governmental organization that works with governments, other NGOs, and different organizations to promote innovation, entrepreneurship, sustainability, and growth across Asia. So under our entrepreneurship pillar, we are very proud to have the Asia Pacific Enterprise Awards, an award recognition program recognizing entrepreneurial and organizational excellence. So the Asia Pacific Enterprise Awards 2020 now has gathered all country chapters into one exclusive regional edition. And the Enterprise Asia Center for Entrepreneurship and Room to Infinity are created by Enterprise Asia and Help University to accelerate the growth of entrepreneurs in Malaysia and across Asia through industry best practices, curation of transferable framework, and aggregation of innovation. And today's series, Room to Infinity, is actually a series of entrepreneurial sharing sessions to educate business and also concurrently empower youth on thought-provoking topics, and at the same time promoting entrepreneurship in the process. And finally, our partner, Help University, is a leading institution of higher learning in Malaysia and is the first private university in Southeast Asia to achieve 5 stars in 8 categories in the 2020 QS Stars University ratings. All right, thank you for listening. And today we have a very special speaker. He is Melvin Poh, the founder of the Asian Entrepreneur, which is a global knowledge crowdsourcing platform and international publishing company that publishes on entrepreneurship in Asia. So his organization has produced close to 1 million free access content, built active readership in over 65 countries, and had developed a network of 1,200 writers globally. That's really impressive. And his organization also actively facilitates the growth of startup ecosystem through knowledge brokering, education, community building, and investment sourcing. So Melvin is officially recognized on the Forbes list as well as on the prestigious top 40 under 40 list. And the impact of Melvin's work has also received scholarly recognition by Harvard University in its project for Asia-Pacific relations. So today's topic is on the future of entrepreneurship post-COVID-19. Melvin will be sharing with us how has entrepreneurship evolved as we adjust to living in a new norm, and with various countries recovering from the pandemic, how has entrepreneurship evolved? So what consequences are there for businesses as they are in recovery mode, and what can we expect for the future of entrepreneurship in Asia? So I'm really looking forward to Melvin's presentation. And just a reminder, we would also love to hear all your thoughts and questions. So you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions. To do so, just type your questions into the Facebook chat. I'd like to encourage you to ask as many questions as possible, where Melvin will address them during the Q&A session later. So to those that have just logged on and joined us, welcome. So I think let's not prolong the waiting time any longer. Let's hear from Melvin. So enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. And I think that was a fantastic introduction in terms of the initiative they're doing and also in terms of our work. And I think the best way to really start off today is to just start off with the fact that we are all doing this speech, this conference through the computer. Now, we could have instead been doing it in a nice decked out hall, perhaps in a university somewhere where we could see each other face to face. But here we are, me staring into the webcam and you staring into computer screen. Now, a year ago, if any of us were to say that this would be the norm of doing conferences and speeches today, I don't think any of us would have expected it or believed it. But here we are. This year has been such an extraordinary year, and a lot of things has really happened. So today, to really get into this topic, I would like to really examine the virus itself, the pandemic, and also the impact it's had on the business landscape, and also how that's changed the process of entrepreneurship going forward. And I hope everyone can get a bit out of it. And if you have any questions at the end, I'll try and address all of them. So to start off with, I think it's really important to talk a bit about the coronavirus. This pandemic at the moment has been touted by many to be one of the most immense and also most critical global crisis since the Second World War. The responses that we've seen has not only led to an impact on the lives of people, as well as their livelihood, as well as just the overall lifestyle of many people, many societies, but also we have seen immense response in terms of how the government's actually handled it, from restrictions to lockdowns to stimulus packages. A lot of impact that really transcends industries and also borders. To talk about the virus now, by this week, the corona cases actually is about to surpass 11 million people being infected. And the impact it has had on the business economy is immense. We have seen up to a 40% decline in merchandise trade, up to a 40% decline in global FDIs, and also a 80% drop in airline travels, and also impact to the levels of global exports that has actually now brought it to a level that we last seen in the mid-2000s. Businesses are affected everywhere. And we have seen the worst performing results in stocks all across the board in the last quarter that we have not seen in the last 30 years. So it really has been an incredible impact that we've seen. A lot of countries are now deeply affected. The estimated impact in terms of losses this entire pandemic is going to cause is estimated to be around 12.5 trillion. So this really is quite an immense impact that we're seeing economically speaking. A lot of countries, a lot of economies positioned to go down into downturns and also recessions. But aside from the seemingly unavoidable downturns and recessions, what's really unique about the pandemic that sets it apart from the other crises that we've witnessed is that unlike the other crises, this pandemic has a directly transformative effect. in the sense that it actually is transforming the business landscape as we know it. And from our research, we actually do see three fundamental transformations that are currently happening that will change the landscape of business going forward. First of all, we're seeing a direct transformation almost overnight, effectively, of the market consumption behavior. Consumers are changing the way that they're actually approaching and interacting consumption in the market economy at the moment. Not surprisingly, because this crisis, unlike others, has a direct health impact on people with the potentiality of being fatal. So a lot of people are really apprehensive in terms of going out, in terms of how they live their lives and how they interact in this economy. They're now much more apprehensive in terms of how they consume. They're spending much less. They're also choosing to spend differently, opting for safer, more convenient ways of spending. In many countries, there really is no choice, because in many countries, there are lockdowns as well. So they have no choice but to change. But we are seeing changes. And as a result of that, we are seeing a shift in terms of consumption being the way it was, now more towards the digital route. And we're seeing the emergence really of the digital economy at an unprecedented scale that we have never seen before. And this really has really been the case in countries all across the board, all over the world. And really is an incredible thing to see this rise of digital consumption and also the pervasiveness of internet adoption during this crisis. The second transformation that we're seeing as well is in the very way that businesses operate. Of course, the measures taken by countries all around the world slightly different in terms of severity, but all of them have more or less changed the way that businesses operate. From, for example, having to deal with restrictions and having to perhaps change the way they actually work, for example, working from home remotely, to adopting new digital work technologies, that no doubt will change the business culture and business processes of working going forward. But also in terms of, aside from that, in terms of the global supply chain as well. In this crisis, with partially most of the world locked down, a lot of countries, a lot of businesses in a lot of countries are now no longer able to access supply of their resources and materials and skills from countries that they previously worked with. So this has really had a direct impact and led to different shifts as well, with businesses trying to transform their supply chain, going towards a route of localization, automation, and also decentralization. Again, a lot of shifts as well in the very structure of the business itself. The third major transformation that we're seeing as well is in the business finance and the capital flow of the market. So given that the whole world at the moment is uncertain, volatile, we don't know what's going to happen next, investors are now very, very wary, generally very bearish, they're afraid of what's going to happen next. And that's affected the sentiments of the investors, as we're seeing a significant drop all across the board of business financing. And that's really had a major impact on many businesses, because a lot of them now find themselves heavily underfunded and also out of financial fuel. And that's actually led to bankruptcies and even the collapse of many businesses. So if we look at the transformations there and just talking about it, we can see that this pandemic is not just a negative financial impact, it's actually a shakeup of the world economic order. It's shaking up the entire order of how things are actually going to be run in terms of the business landscape. And many things will be very different going forward, in the sense that there will be many opportunities, also many challenges going forward, many things that are actually happening now, the transformations that we just talked about, from internet consumption to digital economy, to automation, to decentralization. Many of these things will be permanent changes. And the reason why they are going to be permanent structural changes is because many of these things are actually the next natural progression of our industrial development. But what's so unique about the virus and the pandemic itself, this crisis, is that it's actually sped up the developments and introduced these more innovative, more convenient, more accessible ways of doing business. So the question is that if consumers and the people are so used to these better ways of doing things, which were really shown to us because of this pandemic, how can we ever go back to previous ways of doing things? In other words, how can we turn our back on progress? So a lot of these changes that we are seeing are really going to be here to stay, and they represent the next industrial revolution. And those people who are thinking that this is only a slight temporary change of behavior or change of landscape, they are deeply wrong. And what that means, again, to emphasize, is that there will be different opportunities and different challenges. And depending on how businesses position themselves, there will be different winners and different losers, because the market environment is very different, depending on whether you can capitalize on these opportunities or you will give in to these challenges. Now, already we are seeing in the landscape now, even in the midst of the pandemic, and this is going forward, there are clear winners and losers. Of course, some of you may already know, but namely the winners at the moment where they're seeing immense growth are obviously e-commerce, people in the digital consumption space, from online stores, online marketplaces, digital stores of various sorts, even food in terms of food delivery, and also the more innovative approach to doing food at the moment, education in the terms of virtual education, to fintech in terms of contactless payment and remote banking services, logistics in terms of technology-enabled delivery and also localized delivery, digital entertainment in terms of games, in terms of virtual reality, streaming on demand, work technologies in terms of video call technologies, conferencing technologies, remote working technologies. But of course, there are also losers, businesses that are currently struggling to stay afloat. Restaurants, of course, airline travels, oil trading, fashion as well to a degree, real estate, transportation, hospitality, tourism. These businesses are really struggling now with the current landscape, the current market reality. So what does it mean exactly? Does it mean that an entrepreneur, a business owner, has to be in these golden industries in order to succeed in this market environment? Does it mean that the process of entrepreneurship going forward is going to be different? And the reality is the essence of entrepreneurship will not change. The process might change, but the essence will not. And we need to remember the whole point of being an entrepreneur at its heart is really an entrepreneur is a problem solver. So it really depends on whether the entrepreneur is able to identify the market reality, the new market reality, and creatively realize what are the needs and the gaps of the market, and then develop these creative and ingenious solutions to meet these gaps, maybe establish a new value network that has been previously disrupted by the crisis. So statistically, what we have seen in terms of businesses that have succeeded in this period are really those that are able to adapt themselves and change their mode and really fit into these criteria and actually fulfill the role of providing these needed values and services at this period. So that really is a thing going forward, even if the entrepreneur is actually in an adversely affected industry. For example, in the restaurant business, of course, so many of them are affected. You do have these ingenious business owners that are able to adapt. For example, even in Malaysia, as an example, we do have restaurants such as My Burger Lab that have actually thought about what to do with the unprepared supply of food resources they have. And what they did was to actually transform it into a food preparation kit for home and directly sell and ship those, selling the supply of the food itself to the consumers so they get their fix and so they can actually still operate a business in this period. We've seen the same thing with Din Tai Fung and there's some other restaurants. Similarly, another approach, Canlis, also in the fancy dining business from Seattle, what they've done is they've actually gone into the logistics business. They've set up a fleet of rented trucks and they set up mobile drive-through points throughout the US where customers can actually get their fix of their fancy food. So again, they have found a way to go around it. In the retail space, where a lot of them are affected, especially in shopping, a very interesting company, Streetify, what they've done is they've actually recreated a virtual high street with real-to-life positioned stores, and they work with retailers to recreate an entire high street. And now consumers can actually go down and do high street shopping just using their phones. Again, it's also about overcoming the challenges that they're facing. So we can see that really survivability is about that, and it's about being able to realize what's happening to the market. But what about the process? So we know now that those are able to seize opportunities, they're the ones that are going to win from this, and those that are challenged by it, they're the losers. But what about the process? How is the process of entrepreneurship going to be like? How is it going to transform going forward? Now, from our research, we actually believe there are 3 core steps that every entrepreneur must take during this period in order to really capitalize and gain a competitive advantage after this entire pandemic. The first thing is really to focus on survivability. You see, the entire market landscape has changed. The market reality is no longer the same. So the business model that anyone has at the moment, any entrepreneur has, is actually disrupted, whether they realize it or not. It was actually built for a market that no longer exists. So the first step is to realize that your business model is actually creating a lot of undue stress and strain, financially speaking, for your business. So the first thing is to really focus on how you can extend your runway and control your burn rate. Many of the cost structures that exist may no longer be justified. Maybe they may even be obsolete. So it's really to study from a structural standpoint what is actually draining down the organization, the business, and affecting its survivability. So the focus really is on trying to make it more lean. Statistically speaking, the ones that are able to build a more leaner operation in this period are able to actually survive just to begin with. Now, we have seen people do this in different ways. We have seen it from, just in terms of cutting off certain expenses, all the way to layoffs, even to some degree, startup or business hibernation, where they entirely halt operations until they realize what to do next. But the focus is to extend the runway of the business and be in a survivable position before any strategic consideration is actually made. Then once that is done, next step is to realize, as mentioned, since the market reality is different, you need to critically examine your business's fit to the market and see whether the goods and services that you're offering are still aligned to the market. See, some of the value propositions that you had may no longer be valuable in the current context of today. So it really is about going back to the drawing board and looking at how you can recreate a value, again, in terms of the propositions of the business. And it's also including studying your customers. They may have changed. Their predispositions, preferences, their desires may have changed. So really to go back to that and see how you can create value again. And then perhaps it's not just about the value proposition. Perhaps the value proposition is intact, but what's changed is actually your value chain, in the sense that how you actually market and distribute your goods and services and your value proposition. So it also involves us reconsidering how do we access the market again with the value chain. For example, in terms of marketing, perhaps you have to realize that certain channels that you've used before no longer applies, whereas new channels are now emerging with greater opportunities to tap into the market. So it really involves you to sit down again and reconsider and redesign the entire value proposition of the business, the entire value chain, the entire goods and services. The third step then is, once you've survived and you've realized strategically how to create value again, then it's about organizational evolution. So the structure of your business may be, again, undercapitalized in the sense that its capabilities are actually not suited to the new market. Perhaps to realize some of the things that we just talked about, you have to actually build new capabilities, new resources, new structures for your business. So that involves really looking at how you can do so. And that involves perhaps investments, partnerships, but really to create the necessary capabilities and resources to actually realize your new objectives in this new market. So when you combine that process together, you'll realize that the true winner does not necessarily have to be in the golden industry. Rather, they have to be entrepreneurs that are able to be aware of what is actually happening and realize what is actually happening in terms of the transformations to the markets that they're in terms of the consumers that they're targeting. They are entrepreneurs who are adaptable, who realize that they do have to change and they do have to adapt to it. And they're agile in the sense that they're able to do it really quickly. And they're also able to repurpose the entire organization to actually realize these things. It really is about transformation. It really is about innovation. And it's really about realizing that value has to be at the forefront of whatever you do going forward. And that really sets apart people who are able to survive and really succeed going forward in terms of the future of entrepreneurship post this pandemic. Now, what about the trends? What about the trends going forward that will define Asian entrepreneurship? Well, from our work, we see several. The first thing to really think about is how this crisis has really shown us the importance of resilience. Some people put it in the terms of anti-fragility. And it really shows the importance of having a disaster recovery and business continuity plan in place. In the past, we used to think of these things mainly in the realm of public policy, perhaps in terms of nuclear disasters, floods, or earthquakes. But as we have seen with COVID-19, something like this virus, this pandemic, can be equally as disruptive or destructive as any of the aforementioned disasters. And so a lot of business are underprepared because they had no plans in place for unplanned circumstances, crises. So it really does show that it's important to actually plan for potential disasters and create resilient structures into the organization going forward. And that's something a lot of businesses don't realize. The second trend that we'll probably see from this pandemic defining entrepreneurship going forward is really this question about the future of globalization. You see, for the longest time until today, until this year at least, globalization was generally seen as not only a good thing, but it is an integral thing in terms of business and economy. For many businesses, we work with partners around the world, perhaps even our entire supply chain is tied to perhaps a partner overseas. But of course, this pandemic has actually made a lot of people question, maybe even criticize globalization. And it certainly will make a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs replan how they build their entire supply chain network and entire business network, perhaps diversify more, perhaps localize more, as they now realize how fragile these things can be and how much of an immense impact they can have on their business going forward. So we will certainly see more questions, more criticisms, and more discussions about globalization going forward. And also from the entrepreneur standpoint, more considerations whether they should actually diversify their strategies much more. Perhaps even countries that were heavily dependent on global trade, for example, Singapore, globalization, they might also see certain changes in this regard. The other thing as well that is quite unique is really in terms of the pandemic affecting how we think about the purpose and the value of business in society. You see, of course, a lot of us, we generally think of business as just, this vehicle to drive profits, to create profits. But this pandemic has actually shown us that businesses can play a totally different role. This pandemic has actually created an opportunity for businesses to take on a more social or more communal role, as we've actually seen a lot of businesses come in when governments are stunted by bureaucracy. Businesses and startups have come in to fulfill these gaps that faces the markets, and we're seeing incredible things being done. A lot of it very social. For example, we are seeing in cosmetics, companies like L'Oreal and Dove, they've actually changed a production line to produce sanitizers. We've actually seen in fashion brands repurposing a production again to produce PPE and hospital gowns. Automotive, changing manufacturing to make ventilators. And then in the digital space, we're seeing a lot of businesses working really hard to help other traditional businesses digitize and go online. So we're seeing more communal value and a bigger focus on that. There's also a bigger focus now on sustainability. It's no longer just about the profit motive. It's also about what business can do for society, and also how business can actually assist society in overcoming really great threats and really great disasters. And that is a really interesting thing that we're seeing right now across the board. And then also rethinking in terms of finance. You see, this pandemic has really affected business financing in a very deep way. Of course, in the short term, the direct effect, as mentioned, is really more or less a disruption of business finance, and also a decline of it in this very short run moment. But going forward, I think what we will see is that institutional investors in the past, a lot of the investments going into Asia have generally, in a majority in terms of percentage, been in traditional industries and proven businesses, mainly in manufacturing and energy, domestic services, finance, trade, all these places. Around 20% of it actually went into innovative startup business models, because those were seen as risky. But I think this pandemic has actually given a lot of innovative business opportunity to really shine and show that they are able to create immense value. So I think in the short run, although we are seeing more or less an effect on business financing all across the board, but I think going forward, I think there will be a bigger shift now into considering the fundamentals and the investment value of startups even more. But it'll be slightly different, I think. It'll be more based on fundamentals rather than speculation and risk, because that has more or less been affected already by the pandemic. And also, I think technology, which is a very interesting point, because going forward, I think in the past, technology has more or less been played a supporting function for business. But I think going forward, what we'll see is that technology itself will become the core component and the driver of many business models. I think the major transformation that's happened is really a further integration of technology into the economy, into the society, into market, and we'll see that reflected across the board for businesses of all industries as well. It's no longer possible to just deny the function and the value, and also the strategy of using technology going forward. I think we'll see a further integration there in terms of trend defining entrepreneurship going forward. So talking about what has happened today, in sum, what we have to realize is that we are not just dealing with perhaps going forward in terms of business, just recovering from some sort of a financial crisis, it really is a transformation in the way we do business, in the way we think. And what is really important about that is that we have to realize that for the first time more than ever, in terms of being an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs are now being given a very pivotal role in actually fulfilling the gaps that exist right now. And going forward, this is actually a responsibility to build a better world, to actually create better solutions. And those that we notice are actually succeeding in the business world are the ones that are actually doing that. And that's the key thing we have to take away. It really involves how we perceive what has happened with the pandemic, and also how we actually take from it, what we can learn from it. And those that have actually figured this out are really in the position to benefit from it in terms of growing their organizations and their businesses and developing a much more valuable and more competitively advantageous business going forward. So I hope most of you have actually learned something from this, and I now open the floor to questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, there's
Hi.
something with my camera. I don't know why it's green. Okay, never mind. Thank you, Melvin, for your sharing. So without further ado, I think let's now proceed to answer some questions from the floor. So, okay, let me see. Okay, we have one from VCAT. He is asking, as the economy starts to reopen, what are the key changes entrepreneurs and businesses will need to make to recover or succeed?
Right, VCAT. Okay, sure. Again, touching on what I've mentioned, 3 core steps. I'll simplify it now. So the first thing is, I think most entrepreneurs, if they're running a business now, the first thing is to build a survivable position. So what that means is, first thing is actually get rid of the threats that are currently threatening your business. And we're talking about financial threats. So we're talking about looking at the cost structure and getting rid of the unnecessary costs, because they do affect the survivability of a startup. There's no planning of what's next or what's the next strategy until you can actually be in a survivable position. You have to really focus on the runway of the business, the term we use to describe how long the business can survive at its present stage. Extend the runway with an updated lifeboat strategy by getting rid of these costs, unnecessary ones. And then once you get rid of the cost, then the next thing really is to, as I mentioned, to look carefully at what has changed with the market of the industry that you're in. How has your customers changed? How has their preferences, their behavior, their desires changed? You know, what do they want? How do they get those goods and services now? How are they thinking? And then once you can realize what those are, maybe you'll start to see opportunities. You can see gaps, you can see needs and desires, and then you can redesign your product, your service, your offering to capture that again in terms of offering something much more valuable. But then it requires really a conceptualization of what has happened, what has changed, and how you can actually, again, align yourself to that again. And finally, when you realize that, the next thing really, and the toughest thing really, is to build the capabilities for your organization that allows you to get into that new market reality again. And that involves perhaps investing, perhaps, for example, for a business that has never done a digital business, for example, a traditional industry, that might involve building up a digital team, outsourcing maybe, or building up a website. Perhaps if you can't do it by investments, by partnerships, perhaps working with other existing companies that are doing similar things, or marketplaces, platforms. So really, this 3-step is what entrepreneurs would really have to go through in terms of the future process for entrepreneurship after this pandemic. This pandemic is really incredible in the sense that it's reset more or less everything in terms of the market landscape. So if you are able to realize that and do the 3 things, I think you would be in a better position than you were going in and coming out of the pandemic.
All right, thank you, Melvin. So next, we're going to be addressing a question from Irene. How does the pandemic affect the funding for startups? What is the criteria quality that investors are looking at now?
I think this is a 2-part answer. So from our work, from our research, the first thing we're seeing now is that in the short run, in the immediate run, I think funding now has actually declined more or less. If you compare it to figures and statistics from a year ago, it's actually so much more less. Investors are now more or less really careful. I think we came from a period of last year and the year before where funding was more or less quite risky. I mean, there was a period where a lot of businesses, even with questionable fundamentals, are getting a lot of funding, they raise a lot of money, and a lot of speculative investing. But then this pandemic has more or less brought all that down. And now investors are really careful to invest, focusing more on strong fundamentals. So the first part answer is that funding has more or less slowed down at this point. But I think after the pandemic, it will pick up again. And I think a lot of institutional investors, so we're not just talking about venture capitalists or angel investors, I think they'll also start to look into innovative companies and startups much more than they did before, just because globally throughout this period, what we have seen actually is that a lot of startups are actually doing incredible things and capturing a lot of market value in the ways that traditional and conventional businesses can't. And I think that is going to shift the mindset of investors going forward. Now, in terms of criteria, I think, again, two-part answer. At the moment, I think if you are trying to secure investment from private equity sources, you do have to more or less show that you have strong fundamentals, strong figures, and perhaps your organization is in a place to actually weather through this crisis at the moment. But I think going forward, similar thing as well, strong fundamentals, but also proven result that you've actually been able to create a business that more or less is able to capitalize in the market. I think they will look very carefully, much more than before. I think there'll be a general shift of the mentality of investment going forward.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's address the next one. I'll just like to address it to the audience if you have more questions. So feel free to pop them into the Facebook chat. All right, let's hear. Okay, we have from Chun Ho. What are the biggest mistakes and smartest moves you have seen businesses make since the crisis hit?
Right. The biggest mistakes I've seen a lot of companies make during this period that we've seen our work is really companies that have not adapted, and they assume that everything is more or less the same, and they're trying to run the same business models. We have seen this from the smallest companies, startups, all the way to the biggest companies, and we're seeing a lot of bankruptcies. So they've not realized what's actually happened. They've not actually adjusted their model of operation, and it is really quite silly in a sense, and they're not capturing on the current trends. But the smartest ones are the ones that realize the shift, and they're able to entirely repurpose the organization, even in an area like, for example, marketing. We can see the same dynamics apply. Businesses that assume everything is the same, again, buying ads, putting out, they have these certain promotions. It doesn't hit people as hard, doesn't capture them as much as organizations that realize, the current landscape and how people actually think, the current sentiments, and they've actually tackled more on the sort of communal value, communal thought as well. For example, organizations now are marketing in the sense of how they care a lot. They're creating these initiatives. Hotels, for example, creating certain initiatives to allow housing at a cheaper rate to directly tackle the market. We're seeing that certain organizations are changing themselves, and many of them are not. And that's really how you can tell one person is doing it wisely and one isn't.
Okay, so the next question is from Veronica. So what are your thoughts on social entrepreneurship after the pandemic? And will it become more mainstream?
I think definitely. I think this pandemic will drive social entrepreneurship much more. I think already as a general trend, we have actually seen the increase of social entrepreneurship in the last 6 years, even alone. They're getting a lot more funding in the sense of funding support, and they're getting a lot of more acknowledgement as well from institutional players, and there's a lot of partnership support or collaboration. But I think this pandemic will definitely drive that forward, and we're already seeing that because we're seeing a lot of even non-social businesses taking on a more social entrepreneurial role. And I think it's because in this pandemic, a lot of us all across the globe, as people, the population, we do realize how important it is to actually focus on sustainability, on these questions of social value that we didn't really focus on before, but now much more important. So I think there will be a change in thought, and we'll definitely see it become much more mainstream, definitely. And not only that, not just purely social entrepreneurs, I also think we will see a lot of businesses, established businesses, even big players, take on more CSR initiatives than ever before, because they're already doing that right now during the pandemic. And I think this will definitely continue. They're not going to just stop going forward. If they've actually established themselves during this period doing these initiatives, I think we'll see much more from that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, okay, I think we have one more question here from Ian. We have seen several retail giants close down recently due to the pandemic. How do you think the retail industry can move forward?
So I think it depends on what sort of business we're talking about in retail. But if we're talking about, let's say, just stores themselves, I think generally all stores right now, they need to digitize because, again, from this pandemic, we've actually seen really the massive emergence of digital consumption. And especially in Asia, there's still a lot of retail players that are not exactly in the digital retail space. And that's really a missed opportunity. And now it's not just an opportunity, it's, again, survivability. They're actually not tapping into the new channels that are being developed and evolving right now from this pandemic. So for those retail stores, retail businesses, that's the thing they have to focus on. But then in terms of retail, in terms of like, for example, shopping malls and stuff, I think they have a even bigger challenge. Of course, in Asia, I think retail shopping, shopping mall is still something that is still relevant to a degree. But if we look ahead at other countries, even in the West, for example, retail, even before the pandemic, has actually seen significant declines. The pandemic has dealt an even greater blow. So I think really going forward, if we're trying to talk about physical retail, there really is an importance to design truly a valuable and also a very innovative retail experience of why a person should go to a certain place. I think in the short run, what we'll see is we'll probably see a lot of stores in terms of the retail mix of the shopping mall change. I think we'll see more focus towards food and beverage because those things are still, you could say, a value for going there in person to do. But I think we'll see a lot of stores actually focus perhaps much more on digital and perhaps less in the retail mix. But going forward for these players, for these shopping malls, I think they have to really carefully design something, a more innovative and more valuable retail experience that justifies us going there going forward.
Okay, thank you, Melvin.
Thank you.
Okay, to the audience, let's give it like a minute or so to see if there are any questions coming. Okay. But it's great to see there's so many audience coming from different countries. Okay. All right, if there are no more questions, I think we have actually come to the end of today's webinar. Okay, so okay, I want to address this to the audience. If you have further questions for Melvin, you can reach out to him through the Asian Entrepreneur website as shown on the screen, www.asianentrepreneur.org. Okay, so at the same time, for those who haven't liked our Enterprise Asia Facebook page, do click like now to receive future updates. And once again, thank you, Melvin, for the very informative and helpful presentation. Okay.
Thank you.
I saw from the live comments, there's like one more question from Ian. So how about we go back to the questions? Okay. In terms of organizational structure, large or conglomerate seem to be not the way to go post-pandemic. So like any comments on that?
I really like this question because this has actually been a really big topic, area of topic that's really been discussed in business in the past few years, even before the pandemic. I mean, we will really see a shift in terms of how people think about business development going forward, even in the past. In the past, the idea was always to build economies of scale naturally to get bigger and bigger and bigger so that you can capture the market, you can perhaps generate more profits and reach more markets. But of course, then people have started to question that even before the pandemic. And so areas, for example, areas of topic like decentralization or decentralized economy is really a new area. But getting to the question, this pandemic has really brought that into even greater question because what has shown us a few things is, first of all, big organizations, especially the ones that are so pervasive, they're actually not as resilient as we think they are, especially when today a lot of expansion is really tied to globalization itself. And then obviously when certain markets are affected, that really does affect the organization itself. And also in terms of the second thing, which is speed, agility, we can also notice a lot of big organizations are actually not able to respond fast enough to changes in the market. as much as we think they could, but they actually can't. They don't have the speed and agility of a startup. So yeah, there is really a lot of debate about it. I don't think we will see the death of conglomerates or large organizations, but I think what we will see is a change of thought and a change of perhaps in strategy of how certain entrepreneurs plan how to build their organizations. For example, this pandemic has really highlighted perhaps rather than actually expand, you build a localized approach to, let's say, your market and really just be based on the market and work with local suppliers. And that can also affect how organizations actually grow. That's a much more decentralized approach than, let's say, a conglomerate would do. And I think, again, a lot of debate about it. Going forward, I wouldn't say they would die, but certainly I think there'll be a change in thought and perhaps a lot of options for businesses trying to develop themselves. Even right now, in the debate of even globalization, we do have people argue more or less the same things. Will be the end of it? I don't think a lot of those things that we are skeptical of will end, but definitely we will see modification in terms of how people build businesses. And I think in terms of organizational structure, I think we'll definitely see more people working with a different approach. Perhaps rather than building these massive supply chain networks, we'll see automation, localization. We'll see different approaches rather than just the traditional way of trying to expand your supply chain network and your entire value chain. Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think we have come to the end of the webinar. So I hope everyone benefit from today's presentation. So thank you once again, Melvin, for the very helpful sharing. So before we actually end the session, do you still have anything, one last thing to add, you would like to address to the audience?
One last question or one last comment?
Yeah, one last comment. Do you have anything else? Yeah.
Sure. Again, just to summarize what I've mentioned, in sum, today, this pandemic is not just about financial impact, a financial crisis. This pandemic is about transformation of the market economy. So for anyone that is running a business, please do not assume that things are the same. That's furthest from the truth to the first extent. Everything has actually changed. And now really is a time to look carefully at your structure, to look carefully at your goods and services and the value they offer, and also to consider how you can actually evolve your current structure and current offerings to the next level. And being adaptable and being sort of aware and agile really are the key values that will drive you forward. Of course, now, a lot of things are still up in the air. Everything's very volatile. But still, rather than just wait, realize that other entrepreneurs are doing this very successfully right now. And so it's not about a period of just waiting for the storm to be weathered through, in terms of us overcoming the pandemic with a vaccine. Now is a time more than ever to really step up and truly be an entrepreneur. And that's really the whole point of being an entrepreneur, to actually, realize these things that other people can't and create value out of it. And so for the first time more than ever, perhaps for some successful entrepreneurs, it's time to actually go back to the drawing board. I think it's an exciting thing rather than a frightening thing. But again, if anyone has any other questions or like more insights, please go to our website, asianentrepreneur.org. And we're a partner of Enterprise Asia, but basically we're a free knowledge initiative with practical insights, all for free. And you can learn much more from that.
All right, thank you so much. So on behalf of Enterprise Asia and Head University, I would like to thank you everyone for attending today's Room to Infinity live talk on the future of entrepreneurship post-COVID-19 by Melvin Bo, founder of the Asian Entrepreneur. So we hope to see you again next time in another Room to Infinity session. So have a great week ahead.
Thank you. Thank you,
everybody. Thank you.